Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester, and you know what we like to do here on Daily Spark. We want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. The tongue does a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark that can set a great forest on fire. And today we are talking to author Calvin Cassidy. And we're going to get you on fire about your life and walking with Christ. Well, it was a fiery car crash that sends a teenage boy on a spiritual journey to heaven. And the result is a life of spiritual fulfillment here on earth. So let me tell you a little bit more about Calvin. Calvin is a retired school teacher. His career in education spanned 40 years. Currently, he is serving on the tribal council and participating in tribal government affairs for the Seneca Cayuga Nations in northeast Oklahoma. He is a church leader for more than 15 years at St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Joplin, Missouri. Calvin worked with Christian educators and youth activities. As a Native American, he researched his tribal heritage and enjoys his cultural diversity. He does programs about his tribe and about his culture. Well, Calvin is a strong supporter of environmental and ecological education. Sharing the wonders of all that God has created is an important part of his personal mission. He serves on the boards of the local nature center and the local Audubon chapter. Well, Calvin lives in a small southwest Missouri county with his community, with his wife Vicki. They have two daughters, both are teachers, and he also has four grand boys. So I know that he is fired up about sharing all of that with his grandchildren, especially because there's nothing like having those beautiful walks and talks with your grandparents. I loved my grandparents, so I'm sure they do as well. Well, without any further ado, let's go on and bring Calvin in. Good morning, Calvin. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I love the title of today's show. We are bridging the gap, a heavenly experience and a life of fulfillment through Christ. Now, I cannot wait to pick your brain about your book, but I want to make sure that we cover a little bit of everything. I especially love it when educators are on because they can give us a different perspective about what we need to do to help really encourage our children. So why did you write your book, or how did you decide that you wanted to be an author in the first place?
Well, the reason I wrote the book was to share this remarkable adventure I had as far as, being included in a chance to get an absolute 100% for sure vision of what heaven might look like. And, I mean, that just makes everything in your life so much more meaningful. So I wanted to share that from the fiery car crash to this special journey, and I wanted to basically, like you say, empower people and work with people's belief systems, especially younger people. And I think today that is so important. I mean, you can ask people. You could go to any group of people and you say, raise your hand if you're a Christian. And most of them would raise their hand, probably. I mean, we hope. But how many people really understand or really, want to become more involved Christian? And I started it with younger people because they were some in very desperate need.
Now, did you think that when you were a younger person, like perhaps when you were a teen or even a young adult, that you would ever write a book, that you would be an author? Has it been like a lifelong goal, or did you find that the time was just right and the message needed to be shared now?
Well, from the outset, immediately following the accident, I became an avid journaler, and at that time I really didn't know why, but I just did because it was kind of kind of a relief mechanism, because right after the crash things were very stressful, And I just continued that work when I started my career in teaching. I just continued to keep these journal entries. Probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and this is 30, 40 years after the fact, a discussion at our church came up about spiritual autobiographies. And while this is not a complete autobiography, it was easy to adapt that outline. And with all the journal entries, at that point, I figured out how I wanted to do it. And even at that point, it took about 4 years from that church introduction to the completed project.
And it's so interesting how you can, as the host, you can ask each author, how long did it take for you to write your book? And you never really get the same answer twice. Every author has their own experience. Some people, oh yeah, I cranked it out in a weekend. Other people, it's been a life's work. You just never really know how your book is gonna come about and how long it's gonna take for it to come around. Now, you were talking a little bit about how the book is organized. What made you decide to organize the book the way that you did?
Well, that was probably the hardest part. People ask me, and I tell them the hardest part was how to start and how to end. Because when you're talking about Christian experience, it never ends. You just have to decide what part of the story you want to tell. In the beginning, the first chapter or two is just an introduction of me as a character. I was a teenager, or late teenager. I was 19 years old. And, with teenagers, you hang out with guys and I like to have fun. And so we were on a day trip, and we were, having fun. We were going to Branson, Missouri, back when Branson wasn't quite what it is today, but it was still hilly and a challenge for some teenagers. And this fiery crash occurred, and it was one like you really don't hardly see anymore. The car just exploded. We got out. To talk a little later about that, because that was remarkable in itself. And then that's the catalyst for the whole story. That fiery crash and the heavenly experience, and then the abrupt return to the world like we live in today.
Right.
After that, there was some chapters. I guess my favorite section to write was a chapter about the young people that I work with, and again, that was just a small collection. And again, hard to decide which ones to use, but the central theme through this whole thing was how God calls you to help children or youngsters that are having problems. They might be, quote, problem children, or they may just be children that are dealing with crisis. Like in one case, there was a young man whose older brother committed suicide, and he was from kind of a troubled situation to begin with. And one thing about when you're working with God as your guide, sometimes you just show up places that you need to be, and you don't even know what you're going to say. But you can deal with these people because God's standing right there with you, and He's putting the words in your mouth, and you see results. In that case, a complete family turnaround. The next section of the book deals with some personal challenges, and those chapters were put in there to make me a little more real. To say, I can do this for other people, but what happens when the table turns on you? One of those chapters is the death of my mom, which was an unexpected car crash. Another one of those chapters is on a tornado that blew our house away. Another was on a situation I had where I thought I might have a brain tumor. Another section was on working in the mission field with total strangers. With the central theme was God working through your life through and into others' lives. I think the biggest challenge there was working with in the mission field, because you didn't know these people. They were dependent on you, and you were dependent on God to help them through whatever situation you might have. But that's the basic organization. The last chapter kind of talks a little bit about my future, but it's changed since I finished the book, so we might talk about that at the end also.
So coming up with the title, Bridging the Gap, did you find that to be, quite easy? Like, did it just come to you like, that's it, boom, it just kind of came to you? Or did you find that you had some other working titles, and by the time you were done with the book, you understood what the perfect title would be?
Actually, once I decided I was going to do it, that was the title that I picked from the very beginning, because that's kind of the theme of the book. And the first part, probably the most important part, is the bridging of the gap between heaven and earth, and that transition. But then in my personal life, bridging the gap between the generations. I mean, I've worked with young people, a lifetime with young people. Now I'm working with tribal people, working with mission people, and maybe some of the toughest challenges are bridging the gap in families and things like that. So the title came, and then I guess maybe that was my real motivation. We talked about autobiography, and that's when I decided I was going to do it, and that was the title that I decided on right from the beginning.
Well, Calvin, it is almost time for us to go to break, and I want to make sure that everyone is able to get in contact with you, or maybe I should say, be able to pick up a copy of your book. What are the best ways for folks to follow you online or get a copy of your book?
I have a website. It's calvin-cassady, all one word, .com, and that's CALVINCASSADY, no spaces, all lowercase, .com. I have two Facebook pages. One is called Bridging the Gap, and the other is called Calvin-Cassady the Fourth, IV the Fourth, because I'm from a long line of Calvin. Those would be the two easiest ways. I have an email address also. It's V as in Vicky, C as in Calvin, and then Cassidy, CASSADY, @ATT.net.
All righty. Well, you heard it here, listeners. You can visit any one of those sites and be able to pick up a copy of this wonderful book. Well, we need to take a very short break, but when we get back, we will continue to speak with Calvin Cassidy. He is the author of Bridging the Gap. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. My guest today is Calvin Cassidy. He is the author of Bridging the Gap. You can find him online at calvin-cassady.com. Now, Calvin, you were describing this book that it's about a spiritual journey of a teenage boy. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about how your spiritual journey began?
Okay, I was 19 years old. I was, getting close to graduating from college, and two of my buddies and I decided that we wanted to go on a little day trip, and in the process, and from no fault to anybody, we ended up in this terrible fiery crash. Nobody, wasn't another car. It was simply some miscalculations in the sun. We crashed into this tree, and the car just burst into flames, just like, now I can't remember the flames, but I can remember the heat. And I can remember being out of the car, but again, when we get on with this section, I'll explain a little bit about how that happened. It's remarkable in itself. But so so I was injured. My head was sliced open, and it was bleeding terribly bad. So they got me in the ambulance, and on the way to the hospital, the ambulance driver said, when we got to the hospital, that I had passed away and I had to be revived. At that time, I was, weak, critical, but it's what happened during that time that's the story of the book. Because during that time, and you can't calculate it, because anytime you're talking about heaven, you're talking about a different time schedule. And but anyway, I felt myself being withdrawn and becoming more of a spiritual being than a human being. I felt the transition. I guess the scariest part, and maybe this is another big part of the story, because I feel very validated to explain this now, since it's happened to me, that you're thinking about your judgment, and you're thinking, you're just a little bit worried. I mean, it's kind of scary. You're passing through this transition, and it's kind of cold, and there's really no description. You just feel a little bit you just feel like you're in a state of unsure and just confusing, and it's kind of cold, and you're kind of nervous, but then you're beginning to think, well, now what happened? Your anxiety is about sin, is about things that as a young person you might have encountered. At the end of this journey, there were none. And that was maybe the most remarkable part of it all, because I think that's what a lot of us worry about.
Right.
You do.
But you do.
But about the time, I got to the end of that, I like to say that as you were moving along this path and your life beginning to illustrate itself before you, as you pass, I guess when you pass through it, the cold begins to become warm, and before eventually you reach this place of radiant heat, radiant energy. And this is just a metaphor, but it's like a big curtain rises and you see the other side. Now, obviously, that's the theme of the book, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because that would give the whole thing away. But I will just, the thing that I remember most is the imagery was very vivid, very not earthly. All the colors, all the sounds, everything was very pure. You felt very relaxed, very comfortable, very happy. Your anxiety just completely disappears, and then of course when you get to that stage of the game, the question most people ask is, why didn't you just stay there? Which is a good question, But through this judgment stage and through reflecting on my life, I saw an opportunity. And I put in my notes, I kind of bartered for an opportunity to come back to Earth, being fully aware of what's going on, and that maybe I could be kind of like a disciple. Maybe I could share this with people, make their lives better, because I was only 19, and God and I kind of went around and around a little while, and then he finally, and it was his decision all along, so I really didn't. But anyway, the next thing I know, after I've been awed and treated to, the greatest experience anybody could ever ask for, I find myself not falling in fear, but just movement back, and farther this little quick journey, which was probably a matter of seconds, it really, I begin to feel, the anxiety return. I begin to feel to be surrounded by, basically returning to a world that was full of sin, and it's just like you don't realize it when you're here and it surrounds you, but it's daily life is just a challenge.
I think most people are probably nodding their heads saying, yeah, it really can be. So when someone says that, they're skeptical about what happened, or they want to be able to explain it away, because science may have a different understanding of what you've just experienced. How do you deal with those people, or what do you say to them?
Well, first of all, if they have the courage to bring it up, I think they're pretty okay people, because everybody has their own view of things. Well, not everybody, but there are the skeptics, and they want to explain it away with medication and all. Science is great, and I can't argue with it. But my response my rationale is, what happened was a true miracle. And if you're a believer, you believe in miracles, then you can accept this. If you don't believe in miracles, finish the book, see how a life changed, see how you can see God working through me. And, you can't deny that. Maybe you can deny some of the other stuff, but you can't deny that myself as an individual person changed, and through that, people's lives changed.
Now, did you have any experience? We have a lot of people that wish that they could be visited by angels, or they believe that angels have a beautiful relationships with us here on earth, that sometimes they're able to communicate to us in a special way, or perhaps in a different way that God doesn't communicate with us. Did you have any experiences with any angels along the way, or do you feel that there's an angel that's been assigned to you now, or anything like that? Did you have an experience like that?
Okay, now we can get around back to the fiery crash and back to how I got out of the burning car and onto the side of the road. We knew, the three of us knew that there was somebody behind us in a truck that came along, but just came along quick. It was just like, just before the impact, we realized that there was somebody that was following us. Now, as it turns out, the people, there was two men. One was appeared to be like a rural electric. He was driving a utility truck, and he had picked up along the way a hitchhiker that was a minister and a paramedic. So that's how we got out of the car. I was in the back seat belted in, and honestly, we're talking seconds. Now, that's all great, and when something like that happens to you, you don't realize that until maybe months later, because you're worried about staying alive and getting out of the hospital.
Right, exactly.
Survive. But then you start putting things together, and I started trying to find out who these people were, and I do all the channels, and there's the highway patrol, and the highway patrol said they don't know. They said, you guys were just at the side of the road. When we showed up, we don't know about anybody else. I called the ambulance people, and I said, how did you find out? And they said, some guy called us and said he was at the scene, and so we tried to track the outgoing numbers to see who it was they called. There was no record of it, so I my guard, following us and protecting us, making sure that that we had a chance. And so I've always found that chapter very interesting too. And when I talk to people, especially if they're a little skeptical, that's a little bit more evidence that you were headed in the right direction.
Most definitely. I love to hear those stories, and there is a huge difference, just in case there's someone going, yeah, right, sure. When you hear the stories about someone that has had one of these experiences, let me tell you, their story is so different than any other story that they've ever told. These people could be professional storytellers. This particular, the way that they explain it and what you feel or what you're able to read in the book, you really and truly do understand that this was different. This was something that was really extraordinary. It was out of the ordinary, and it couldn't be anything but just the grace of God moving and working in your life to be able to cover you in such a situation. I have a personal friend that has a story, not about being saved, but just a personal story about something that happened to her along the way. And boy, when you're done, you're like, yep, that was definitely an angel moment. That was definitely a God moment right there. Well, we have to get ready to go to break, but just in case, Calvin, someone came into onto the show a little bit later, can you remind everyone again, how can they get in contact with you, or where can they get a copy of your book?
Well, let's start out with a copy of the book. The books are available at online for any of your major retailers, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, or at my website. It's also available in an ebook, and my website is calvin-cassady.com. That's CASSADY, and on Facebook at Bridging the Gap or Calvin Cassidy the Fourth.
Well, listeners, we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is author Calvin Cassidy, and we are talking about his book, Bridging the Gap. That's right, people, a heavenly experience, and we're talking about fulfilling your life with Christ. Now, we have talked about some pretty awesome things so far, and the book covers so much. And of course, we don't want to give, any spoilers, so you do need to pick up a copy of the book, but we're going to keep on talking about all of the things that Calvin covers in this book. So let's kind of get you caught up a little bit. It is about a spiritual journey. It is about a heavenly experience. And it is about how we can learn from the experiences that God gives us and make our lives a little different than the way they were before. So, Calvin, you write about a chapter in the book where you're talking about your classroom experiences. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. While I was in the hospital recovering, I had several visits with God, so to speak. And one of those things that we talked about was what my mission would be after I got out of the hospital. And I was between my junior and senior year in college majoring in education. And so that seemed to be the direction that he wanted me to go, and I was already headed that direction. So I did spend a lot of time, let's put it this way, the children were my first, I guess you'd say, success stories. And the problem, and the reason I put it in the book was because it was one of the things that was early on in my mission, something that I really needed to fulfill, or to feel fulfilled. And I did have a long career. But kids, and as I found out as I grew older, have a very, very, very weak belief systems. There's so much single parents, so much drugs, stuff in that kids have to be exposed to, that it's hard for them to believe anything that it can be better. So I guess that's probably one of the greatest things that I've learned how to do, given this chance to come back and work with people, is to understand where they are and what they believe, and to strengthen a system based on Christ. And I was able to do this real successfully in school. We had several problem children, and I say several children with problems. There's a difference.
Yes.
Practices. And so, and I also had church children that I worked with, and but it just become real easy to talk with them about what they believe. And when I look back, I think, you did this in the classroom in an era where that was a little bit touchy, and you don't. And I didn't set up, in a preaching sessions or anything. I just shared my one question would lead to another, and those kids that were in need would come to me, and talk and develop a little belief system. And I guess maybe the other part of the story in working with school children is a lot of times the family belief system is what really needs to be overhauled. And sometimes if you work through the school, the families at home aren't experiencing much success either. And if their child's successful, that's what they put out there as their product. If their child feels successful, then they can feel better as parents.
That is really, really true. And I like how you said that sometimes it's just the opportunities to have that organic conversation with the children, because the children are going to ask the questions exactly where they are, what they want to know, what they're curious about, they're going to ask about, and be able to have a better understanding of where you're coming from and what you're doing. Now, I know that many times people have a misunderstanding of what it means to be Native American living in today's culture. Many times we have been miseducated. Sometimes we just simply haven't been educated at all. So I ask the question this way. Do you find that that your culture has helped you explain the story in a way that reaches more people? Have you found that in explaining your story and what has happened to you, that people are able to kind of get rid of their old understandings of what culture means, and it's really kind of brought more people together?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Believe it or not, in my life there have been conflicts because, and they were, I guess you would call them innocent conflicts. I kind of walked into some of it. When my mother passed away, she was the first of the family of several brothers and sisters, and at least in my when I could remember, to pass away, and that was that was quite difficult for all of us because it was unexpected. But the family, the elders of the tribe gathered at my house. Somebody didn't even know, and they were upset because we didn't include any of the Native American cultural burial. And so they all explained it to me, and they were a little bit in a disappointed explaining way. I was feeling pretty bad afterwards. But anyway, I told them, I said, the only problem here is you got to understand that the world I grew up in, I knew about my culture, but I didn't know. This is something that you only learn when you need to learn it. And I said, there's absolutely nothing that you requested here today that I couldn't have requested that would have made any difference to me. And the funeral people at the funeral home would have gladly done this. So I said, the lesson that I've learned today is next time I'll know better. But that started me on a quest to find out what I should know.
Right.
I did a lot of research. I've done some programs with different groups of people, and but the religion problem was a tiny bit of a problem. I've overcome that because I've done research into our tribe and find out that in 1937, when it was become federally accepted tribe, almost everybody in the tribe went to church and were Christians. There are very, 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 very few select members of my tribe that profess to not believe in God. They believe in the Great Spirit, which I can believe in too. But I've spent my life now, and this has been kind of a rough go, because sometimes you say things and you don't know that the people you're talking to are violently against what you're saying, and they let you know. But I have worked, and I've decided that I had a little journal entry called Urban Longhouse. And I said, in Longhouse we speak English and we believe in God. And and once I reached that point, talking to people, I mean, that's the way I believe, and that's what I think. And if you don't agree, I'm here to change your mind, I guess. You got to work in Native American politics. You have to be very careful and very slow. And I say, I can accept you for what you are if you can accept me for what I am. And really, as a general rule, things are working out pretty good now. But they were a little difficult in the beginning.
Right. And it seems that when we are talking about culture as a whole, if you're talking about your ethnic culture or even your spiritual culture, when we're dealing with diversity, I think that use the word slow. Sometimes that kind of is the best way to go, to make sure that your word choice is best, that you are really expressing your hopes and your wishes and your intent, and that you are being sensitive to what the other, to what the person that you're talking to, what they need and what they expect, but at the same time you're able to get what you need and you get what you expect. And it's just about I think respecting people. Just respecting that we are different, but yet we are the same, that we just all want to be loved and respected and be able to present our best selves at any time, and that we honor those that we think need to be honored in all that we do. So I can understand that. As we talk about all of the different ways that you have learned how to blend who you are, what you want to do, and what your expectations are, be it that we're talking about ethnicity or we're talking about spiritual understanding, what outcomes do you hope to achieve in the upcoming year? What does your future look like for you? What do you want to do?
Well, working with tribal government is a very challenging kind of a job, but I do have some things that I know. My father died unexpected. Well, he was old, and it wasn't unexpectedly, but he did live long enough to. When he passed, he had some strong Christian beliefs, and I was very thankful for that. I mean, that might have been one of the tougher nuts to crack, but. I would kind of like to. One project that I've kind of got on the back burner is a story about those last 6 months, because they went from not so good to pretty awesome, and so when it was his time to pass, I was almost joyful, because he had made some big changes, and he was a lot more. At any age, your belief system can be changed, can be strengthened, and so I'd like I'm thinking of a project there. I've also thought about a lot of people that have read the book said they really enjoyed the section on the work with the school kids, and I thought about a sequel, a shorter sequel that dealt with some more of that. But there was many more that didn't get in the book. And then in the very, very back of my mind, it should probably be in the front of my mind because I'm working with it every day, is a project that deals with the people that I'm working with now. Or whether any of that comes about, it's between me and God to work that schedule out. But those are the things that I'm interested in now. You made some comments earlier that kind of said something through my mind that I'd like to share. When I talk to groups, and sometimes I do, and I am available to talk to groups, there's always people every time that have come up after the talk and said, I'm so glad you came here today because, when I was this age or when I was that age or when my mom died, we experienced what you're talking about here. And I've had an experience like that, and I never told anybody because I thought that it was just me. So I guess maybe that's one of those outcomes that I didn't expect, but I'm very thankful for.
It really is amazing how each one of us really can inspire another person to share, and we become enlightened. Just conversation, just simply bonding with fellow human beings really and truly can make a difference. Well, Calvin, thank you so much for being a guest here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I have really enjoyed my interview with you today. Thank you again for being on the show today.
Thank you for this opportunity.
And with our last few seconds of the show, if you would please explain to our listeners where they can pick up a copy of your book.
Okay, the books are available online at most of your book retailers. They're not in any stores, but you can get them at almost any of the sites. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million are the two. You can also get them at my website, which is calvin-cassady.com. If you need to get in touch with me, my email address is V as in Vicky, C as in Calvin, Cassidy, Cassady @att.net.
Alrighty, listeners, thank you as well for listening to A Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. And as always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you find His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.